All right, so just started the stream, and so I'm just gonna kick it off from here. And yeah, Ark, if you have any questions, feel free to just unmute or type in the chat or anything you want, and I'll be happy to answer. So yeah, welcome everyone to the building with the SDK tutorial. If you're here live, that's awesome, and if you're watching this on YouTube or some sort of recording, welcome in. We're gonna be walking through the Story Protocol SDK today, and then tomorrow we'll be walking through the smart contracts. So there's also that coming as well. So what you're seeing right now is just a blank Excel draw. And throughout the session, I'm going to just walk through all of the tutorials we have on the TypeScript SDK that's in our documentation. You can view our documentation by going to docs.storyprotocol.xyz, and you'll be brought to this page. And then you can just click on Get Started with the TypeScript SDK. Now you'll see there's like a couple, flags here that are things that you can do to learn the SDK. One is the TypeScript tutorial, and we're actually going to be using that today. And then there's also the React tutorial. If you want to learn how to use the TypeScript SDK with something like React or some sort of front end, you can check this out as well. Just to give you like a brief look at it, it's what we're calling the developer sandbox, and it's basically this interactive tutorial on the web that you can use to play around with it. And just to quickly show you, you can even view like code snippets of how each of these functions is done. So I'll just leave that here in case anyone wants to check that out. That's sandbox.storyprotocol.xyz. So yeah, but we're going to be using just the normal TypeScript tutorial today. So there's a lot of different things we can do with the SDK. First of all, just how to set it up, then how to register an IP asset. We'll go over what that is in this session. How to register pill terms and attach them to an IP asset, mint a license token so that we can create derivatives of our IP, and then subsequently register an IP asset as a derivative using a license token, and then a bunch of royalty functions. And at the end, I'll also go over a lot of functions that are on their way that are actually going to make things a lot easier. So, for example, how to register IP and attach pill terms just in one transaction. So there's a lot of utility functions that are coming to the SDK, but I'll go over those at the end. Okay, so first of all, what is an IP asset? And you can also check out a lot of the answers to these questions in the architecture overview. But what is an IP asset? It's basically just your IP on chain. So if you have, let's say, an existing NFT, like a Bored Ape or an Azuki or a Pudgy Penguin or whatever NFT, you can literally just register that NFT as IP. And you'll see how we do that in a second. Or if you have some, off-chain real-world, IP. So, for example, let's say like Mickey Mouse, or like even your house, or some sort of IP you've created, you can simply just mint an NFT on chain and then use that to represent your IP. And I'll show you how to do both. But that is what an IP asset is, and the IP asset is basically like the foundational layer for everything we're going to be doing today, and also the foundational layer for Story Protocol in general, because everything kind of revolves around an IP asset. So let's load up the TypeScript tutorial here. It's this repo. You can clone it onto your computer, and I'll just actually quickly show you that. So if we go to the TypeScript tutorial here, this is the GitHub, and you can just clone this onto your computer, and that's where I am right now. So there's two examples. There's the commercial example and then the non-commercial example. The non-commercial example is a lot easier. And so if you want, you can actually start with this one. This one simply shows you how to register an IP asset, attach terms to it, but it's non-commercial social remixing, which is really easy because it's obviously non-commercial. So there's no royalty payments. So it's actually a lot simpler of an example. And you don't have to pay for the license token because, again, it's non-commercial. So you're not paying any fee to mint a token. It's just open free minting. So this example is really easy, just in terms of registering your IP, attaching terms to it, and minting a license and registering it as a derivative. But we're going to be going over the commercial example, which contains an example for everything. So that's where we're going to start. So the first thing here, and I'll zoom in just to make it easier to read. The first thing here is setting up your story config. So when you're interacting with the TypeScript SDK, you're going to want to do this, right? This is like the first step. And because we want a story client to be able to interact with. So this is, you can see it also links to the docs on each example. So it's a very structured approach. This is the SDK setup spot. And so you can see that there's two ways to set up the SDK. One, if you're using a private key. So like if you're using a private key, you can do that. Or if you want to set up like a MetaMask account, like some sort of JSON RPC account, this is mostly done on a front end, and that's more like in the developer sandbox. But today we're just going to be using a private key. So you would put that inside of your .env. Now there's a .env .example where you can provide some data, and so you would just you would turn this .env .example into a .env file like I have, and then paste your wallet's private key in that file. And so then this will work totally fine. And so you can see that this config is being set up. We're importing the account object, and that's actually coming from this utils file, where you can see that we're just getting the wallet private key from my .env, putting a 0x in front of it to make it a official address, and then we're creating this account object and exporting it by using the private key to account function provided by VM. So we also are using VM, not Hardhat. I'm sure you could get this to work using Hardhat. However, our SDK uses VM natively, so I would definitely recommend using VM because we know that works and it's a lot easier in my opinion. So now that we have that account, we can pass that in. The transport is, we can pass in a Sepolia. The whole protocol right now is deployed on Sepolia testnet. So you would provide some sort of RPC URL for Sepolia testnet, depending on how you want things to run. In our utils.ts, you can see that we actually just provide for you like a simple public, Ethereum RPC endpoint for you to use, or Sepolia endpoint, I mean. So if you don't provide one in your ENV, it'll just use this instead. And this works totally fine. But if you want to, you can go to things like Alchemy and get your own, RPC URL if you want things to go faster, or you want to like have data on, who's running transactions and stuff like that. So I use Alchemy sometimes, but we also provide one here for you if you don't want to add one yourself. So that would get put here, and then the chain ID is Sepolia. So again, the protocol right now is deployed on Sepolia, but the future long-term vision is to deploy it, on any EVM compatible chain and maybe elsewhere, but just Sepolia for now. And then we create the client using that config. So pretty straightforward. Okay, so now that we've done that, we go on to the next step, and this is registering an IP asset. So in order to register an IP asset, we need a NFT contract address and the NFT token ID, right? So it's pretty straightforward information, just the address, like the contract address, and the ID of the NFT. But what this means is the NFT needs to be pre-minted. So that is why we're actually minting an NFT right here, just to show you as an example. Now imagine if you had, if you were doing this on like Ethereum mainnet, right? When the protocol is eventually deployed to mainnet, you could, for example, say, okay, I want to register my Azuki, pass in the NFT contract address and the ID of your Azuki, and it would just register the NFT SIP right here, right? You have just a small note is that you have to be the owner of the IP. It wouldn't really make any sense if you were able to just register someone else's NFT as your IP. So you have to be the owner of the NFT in order to do that. But yeah, so for the purposes of this example, and also most of the time people are registering their own IP that may be off chain, you have to mint an NFT first. And so we actually use this mint NFT function here that I wrote, just a very simple mint NFT function. Actually, I should probably delete this comment here. And all this does, it just uses VM to call a dummy, NFT contract that we deployed. I think it's called like mock ERC 721. It just mints a dummy NFT. I think we've reached ID like 3,000 at this point. In fact, I ran this earlier. Yeah, we're up to NFT token ID 6,304. So we've been minting a lot of test NFTs. But yeah, so this will just mint an NFT, wait for the transaction to be done, and return its token ID. So pretty straightforward function. Nothing complicated going on here. Okay, so once that happens, then we have the token ID, and we can pass in the NFT contract address we minted it from. And again, that's just like a very, you can actually see it here. It's like a dummy mock ERC 721 contract we deployed. However, you also can provide your own NFT contract address. So that's you can do that as well. So yeah, that would mint a token ID, and then we register it as IP. And that just says, root IP asset created at a certain transaction hash, and it'll give you the IP ID. And you can actually see, if I go to my terminal, and let me increase the font here so everyone can see it better. But you can see that right here. So root IPA created a transaction hash, blah, 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 IPA ID, and then this is the ID. So this is actually, this IPA ID, this is the address of where the IP account is created. So if we go to our docs here, whenever a IP asset is created, it will automatically create what's called an IP account that's associated with it. And so IP account kind of manages, we can actually read it right here. It not only stores IP related data, so like data on licensing and remixing and stuff like that, but also facilitates the utilization of this data by various modules. And so what an IP account does is allow us to register or use the licensing module, which is on the left here, to create derivatives of our IP. It utilizes the royalty module to have automatic royalty payments. So for when people create derivatives and pay for licenses, it automatically flows upwards, right? And the dispute module, so that if someone registers IP wrongfully, they can use the dispute module to dispute on chain, right? In the case of like arbitrage, and then if things were to come to the worst, it would go to off chain or whatever. What's that? Oh my god, I'm blanking on the word. Said a whole total brain fart. But it would go to off-chain courts, and people would settle that in court, right? But the dispute module is here to dispute things on chain, so that things do not always have to be brought to court. But the IP account is what facilitates these three modules. So it keeps the state and just allows you to use these modules. And so this IPA ID is actually the address of that IP account. So now that we've gone through that, that is registering as an IP asset. You can see that's just this code right here. And actually, I'm going to update this later today, because we just released a new update to our SDK, where instead of having to first mint an NFT and then register it, we actually expose a new function to allow you to just mint and register all in one transaction. And so I'm going to update that right here. Okay, so next is registering PIL terms. So let's just quickly overview what PIL terms are. So PIL is called the Programmable IP License, and it's an example of a license template on Story Protocol. So let's just go over that really quickly. So a license template is basically like a document containing a bunch of terms in it. So we can actually map this out right here. So let's say we have this document where we say, okay, minting, or we say like transferable Boolean. Then we can say minting fee number. We can say commercial or like commercial rev share number. So it's a bunch of like configurables that you can set. Oh, and also like currency for the for the royalty, stuff like that. So it's a bunch of terms that you almost put in a document. And this is what's called a license template. And people can actually create their own license template with all of their different configurables here. And we can actually see, just because I find this interesting, if we want, we can go to, right, so this is actually the whole list of terms for the PIL. So you can see expiration, royalty policy, commercial use, and like you can imagine in this drawing, so like expiration, that would all be here. And so a license template is just a bunch of terms that define our license in a certain document. Now, the PIL is the first example of a license template that was created by the Story Protocol team. So the PIL is an example of a license template, and it's actually the only license template that Story Protocol supports right now. But it has all of these attributes on it. And so what we can do is, when we go ahead and register PIL terms, or actually, you know what, let me go back to the licensing module, because it's really easily explained here. When we register PIL terms, what we're doing is creating a certain combination of those terms. So for example, you can see here, this is a license template that has is commercial use, is transferable, and royalty. And each of these license terms is just a different combination of that template. So this one has a royalty of 0, this one has a royalty of 5%, this one has a royalty of 10%. And so we allow you to create your own license terms that you can attach to your IP asset, because ultimately you're attaching terms to your IP asset. So if we go back down to register PIL terms, you can see there's a bunch of utility functions to help you do that. So if you want to register a commercial use PIL, it'll automatically set up a bunch of the attributes to be what they should be. So it'll turn commercial use to true, it'll turn commercial rev share to true, all that. But you can pass in the configurables that actually matter. So you can pass in the currency you want to use, and or like the address of the currency you want to use, and the minting fee. So for example, 10, right? So when someone mints this license token, it'll cost 10 to do that, or 10, ETH on Sepolia testnet or whatever it is. And once you do that, it'll say, okay, pill terms are registered to that hash, and the license terms are blank. And those license terms are what you'll eventually attach to your IP asset. You can see this one is creating a commercial remix license, so you also pass in commercial rev share here. And then this function should never really be used because it doesn't really make any sense. Mostly because it's registering a non-commercial social remixing pill, which doesn't take in any parameters. So this actually doesn't really even do anything. But just it's there. So that's what we're doing here. So I'm creating a commercial use pill. I'm passing in a dummy currency address that I'm storing right here. This is like a mock ERC20 token. And I'm passing in a minting fee of 2. So it'll cost 2 of that currency, of that mock ERC20 token to mint this license. So you can see I'm creating that with these. I'm creating essentially license terms here. It's giving me the ID, and then I'm passing in that ID down here in order to actually attach those terms to my IP. So now we're on the next step. So once we've created license terms, we actually want to attach it to our IP asset. And once we attach terms to our IP asset, we can mint derivatives. So essentially what we're doing right now is this is like, you can see this is an example of a license template. And what we're doing is we have a certain combination of those, which is license terms, where we're setting transferable to true, minting fee to 2 in this case, commercial rev share. I'm just gonna get rid of this one because I don't really know. I'm just gonna put no. I don't really know what that is right now. The currency, which is like whatever the currency I passed in is, blah 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 blah, right? And so these license terms right now, we're attaching them to our IP asset. And once this gets attached to our IP asset, then we can create derivatives. So you can't create a derivative of an IP asset on the protocol unless there's terms attached to it. So that's what we're doing right now. So that's this step. So now we're using the attached license terms function. We're passing in the ID of the terms we just created and the IP ID of the IP asset. Again, that's what was created right here. So root IPA created at this hash. Here's the IP ID. Boom. And this is the license terms 31. So just in case you're curious. So that would get passed in here. And then once that is successfully completed, it would say attach license terms to IP at transaction hash, whatever. And so once license terms are attached, now we can actually go ahead and mint a license. So that is the next step. And by the way, we just covered this step. So attach license terms to IP asset. Cool. So let's go to mint a license token. So a license token is essentially, an ERC 721 NFT that gets minted from an IP asset using certain terms. So we can mint, I'm going to draw this as best I can. We can mint this is a ERC 721, and it's called a license token, okay? And so this license token is like any other NFT in the sense that it can, be traded on NFT marketplaces. It can be bought and sold, all that kind of fun stuff. So that is the license token. And this license token also contains inside of it, I'll make this actually a bit bigger. This license token contains inside of it the license terms ID, and that's 31 in this case, right? Because that's what we put right here. All right. I also heard. Oh, hey, Hems.
Hi.
Hey, thanks for joining. We're currently going over the TypeScript SDK. So if you have any questions, feel free to let me know.
Sure, I'll do.
Awesome.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, of course. So okay, so we've minted a license token with this terms ID, right? And so again, this can be bought and sold like a traditional NFT, all that kind of fun stuff. And so that's what we're minting right now. And so in order to create a derivative, we'll need this license token. And actually, that's not entirely true because you don't need a license token. But I'll show you how to register a derivative with a license token and then talk about the how to do it otherwise after that. So we have this license token here. that is this minting step. So we have to pass in the license terms ID. So that's the one we just created, 31. The IP ID, that's just the IP ID of the IP asset. Who's going to receive this? So we can actually mint a license token to somebody, and then the amount. So 1. So we could put 10 here and mint like 10 NFTs to someone, and then it could be like a whole DeFi mechanism where like they can maybe sell some to some people, right? Like there's a whole thing. But this is just how you would mint one license token. And so that this license token will have a certain ID. We can see right here, that would be this. So license token minted at this transaction hash, and the license ID is 828, right? So that's what this would look like. So that's great. So now that we've minted a license token, let's say we want to register another piece of IP. So let's say someone registers Mickey Mouse on Story Protocol, and then I want to create a comic book of Mickey Mouse and register that as IP. So I would register my comic book as a derivative IP asset of Mickey Mouse, right? And so I would need a license token to do that. And so yeah, so the next step is a bit confusing, but stay with me here. So in order to register a derivative, we'll need to first register our derivative work as an IP asset, like we did above, and then we can link it as a derivative after the fact. So this we've already kind of gone over in the sense that this is literally just creating another IP asset. So we're minting an NFT, just like we did before, and then we're calling the register function using the same NFT contract address and the new derivative token ID, and that's going to create a new IP asset, okay? And so then once we create that new IP asset, we can link it as a derivative of the original. And so that's where we can say register derivative with license tokens, right? We pass in the child IP ID, which is the derivative. That's the one we just created. And then the license token ID. So this is the ID of the license token. Now remember, the license token contains information about the parent and also the license terms we're using. So it's all baked into that ID right there. And so once we do that, our derivative comic book is now a child, or other words, you can also call it a derivative of that parent IP asset or that root IP asset. And that gets done right here. So that is how you would register derivative with license tokens. Now I want to pause here because if we go to our documentation here, you'll see that's actually not entirely true. We don't need a license token. This is what we just went over, where you're registering a derivative using that license token, but you can also register it directly, where even if we didn't have a license token, you can just say register derivative, pass in the child IP ID, and pass in the parent IP ID, and the license terms you want to use. This is obviously a lot easier because you only have to call one transaction. But I think it's helpful to know the license token step because, again, there's a lot of like DeFi and utility that comes with minting an NFT in the middle because maybe you can buy and sell it or whatnot, right? And don't be fooled. If you do use this function, you would still have to pay for the minting fee and all that kind of stuff. It's not like you get to skip all that. It's just this is more of like a convenient function that does both kind of in the same step. It's also important to know that when you register a derivative, so let's say we have another IP asset over here. This is the, we'll say this is the derivative IP asset. When we link this, I'm actually going to, I'm not the best drawer, but if we link this as a derivative, so if we link as derivative, this will actually get burned. So this will get burned. So when we link this as a derivative here, we will burn the license token in order to make that happen. Okay, so I know this is like the most confusing diagram ever, but you would mint the license token from the IP asset and then burn it to link as derivative. So that's what I'm trying to communicate here. Okay, so we're moving on to the last section here, and this is the royalty. So I actually put a small disclaimer here that this is not the best example of royalty flow because there's no royalty to collect at this point. You can imagine if we go over here and we say, okay, you know what, we have a, let's say we have a, or I'm trying to figure, yeah, let's say we have an IP asset like this, right? And then we have 2 more. So we will go here, and then we're going to go here. So we have a whole like line. So this is the root. So we'll just put like number 1 here because that's the root. We'll put number 2 here because that's the derivative of number 1. And then we'll put 3 here because that's a derivative of number 2, which is a derivative of number 1. And so if we had, let's say that in order to become an IP asset, or let's say in order to become a derivative of IP asset 2, IP asset 3 had to mint a license token, and that license token costs, I don't know, like, let's say 10 ETH, right? So very expensive. When that happens, let's say IP asset 1 contains, a policy in its terms that says it is due 10% of all of IP asset 2's revenue. Then what would happen is when this gets paid here, IP asset 1 is going to take 1 ETH of that, right? It's going to take 10% of that. So this is a better example of royalty flow where you have 3 IP assets, right? Because it makes sense like that. Whereas in this case, we only have 2. So there's no real example of royalty, but these functions will still work. And so it's good to see. So the way that royalty tokens work, and actually, if you want to have a much better explanation of this, I would recommend checking out the royalty module documentation. It has a really good docs on how everything gets paid. But essentially, just to dumb it down, there's 3 steps. There is collecting royalty tokens, and what that does is an IP asset. Actually, we can even look at this diagram. I'm trying to figure out. Oh yeah, so each IP asset has 100 million what's called royalty tokens associated with it. So, and that is when an IP asset is created, it'll have 100 million royalty tokens associated with it. Now, a parent of that IP asset can claim a certain amount of those royalty tokens based on its license terms. So let's say again, it says, okay, I am due 10% of all your revenue. It'll take 10 million of those royalty tokens and store it in its vault. So in order to collect royalty, you first have to collect the royalty tokens. And the royalty tokens will give you the ability to then claim the actual revenue that an IP asset earns. So if we go down to trying to figure out what's the best diagram to show you. This is probably the best diagram. Actually, I'm just not gonna work with the diagrams because it's easier just for me to explain. But yeah, so this collect royalty step will first actually collect the royalty tokens in order for you to then claim revenue later. So that will happen here. It requires a couple things. One is the parent IP ID. So that's just the IP ID of the parent. And then the royalty vault IP ID, which is simply just the child IP ID. So you pass in the parent and the child IP ID. And the parent will collect a certain percentage of the child's royalty tokens. Then in the next step, when you want to actually claim the real revenue, so let's say that someone minted a license token and paid 10 ETH to the child, the parent can claim a certain amount of that actual revenue. And then in order to do that, you can call this claim revenue function, but this claim revenue function requires a snapshot ID. So it's almost like you're taking a picture of the blockchain. And that picture is, we can do that through this snapshot function where we pass in the child's IP ID, take a picture of it, of like the amount of revenue that's due to all the parents, and then pass in that snapshot ID in this claim revenue step, also pass in the child's IP ID, and also pass in the currency address of the actual revenue that you're trying to claim. And then you'll actually be able to claim the revenue. So this is the step where you would actually claim, let's say 1 ETH from the child. And some people ask a lot, like what would happen if you didn't have the royalty tokens, but revenue was actually due? What would happen is when you would then call this collect royalty tokens at a later point, this would also at the same time collect any outstanding payments that were due. So it would collect any outstanding revenue as well. So even if you don't have the royalty tokens at the time of payment happening, it won't get lost. You will still be able to claim that revenue at a later point. So that is the royalty section, and you can see all this went through down here. And if you want to try it on your own, you definitely can as well. And that is the whole collect and claim royalty step. So I'm going to pause there in case anyone has any questions, in case Ark or Hem, if you have any questions. If not, I'll briefly talk about the developer sandbox, and then we can wrap things up from there. But yeah, I'll pause really quickly.
Yeah, I might have I might give this a shot. I've got one question, kind of came up as I was working with the SDK. So let's say you have like an existing 10K NFT collection, and it's kind of already been established that holders have IP rights to their NFT. They can do merchandise and such with it. But let's say the community decides to use Story Protocol to kind of implement that. And you have several thousand holders, and a few of them start registering their NFTs as IP assets. I'm just wondering, like, what if one or a handful of them kind of change their mind later after registering them? Can they, update something about their license or even revoke it? Is that handled through the protocol?
That's actually a very good question. What, as far as I'm aware, certain license terms can have an expiration date on them, and so it's usually best practice to just say, okay, I'm gonna put an expiration date of like 6 months on these license terms. That way, I can go back in after 6 months and reevaluate whether or not I still want this, these terms to be public. I'm not aware of the ability to actually revoke license terms. I just know of that expiration date, but that's a really good question, and something that I'll ask the team about that and get back to you on that. But yeah, just to reiterate, right, it does support like an expiration where maybe it's better to just like put an expiration on the terms rather than just like having an indefinite one in case users want to change their mind later on.
Yeah, yeah, that's that makes sense. The expiration date. Yeah. And then, I mean, it kind of maybe it completely revoking it, maybe that's just too sticky of a situation if you have derivatives and maybe the derivative tree is established and if someone changes their mind can have kind of a bad impact. And, the blockchain is overall is just, immutable.
Right. Yeah,
But
you're totally right. Because like, what would happen if like someone registered terms and there were derivatives that were collecting payments, and then all of a sudden the root IP revoked its terms? Then it would shut down all commercial use of the derivatives, and so that might have large impact.
yeah, yeah. So revoking, maybe not, just instead just preempt that with expiration. What about, can you add additional license terms if if they want to change something? Is that how?
Yeah, yeah. So you can
Yeah,
you can always add new terms. As I don't think there's like a limit as to how many license terms you can add. So if you want to, you can always just go ahead, register new pill terms, and then attach them just the same as you would any other.
yeah. Okay.
Yep. The only extra note I'll add to that is that just remember that once you attach license terms to your IP asset, it does become public. So people would be able to, again, like if you have certain license terms, like people could just go ahead and mint a license token and then use that. There is the case of like a private license. So if you don't attach license terms to your IP asset, and actually, I think there's even maybe a link I could send on this. Private licenses. So in order to mint a private license, the owner of the root IP asset can issue license tokens that have terms that are not yet attached to the IP asset itself. So you can mint a license token, and this is actually where the license token comes in handy as opposed to just like registering directly. But you can mint a license token with certain terms on it, but those terms are not actually attached to the IP asset itself. And then you can mint that to someone, and that's like a private license. So if you want to give a certain somebody, better, better, like for example, royalty payments or like a longer expiration date, you can also do that using a private license. So just thought I'd throw that in there as well.
Yeah. Okay. Very good.
Okay, awesome. So that was pretty much all the TypeScript tutorial.